And at some point, I realized like all the stuff that I enjoyed as a kid, like watching documentaries and reading popular science, that there was actually a job which involved making those things. And so I've been doing that ever since. And I feel like I really lucked out. It's an awesome career, and it gets me to study interesting things all the time.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, we meet NPR science reporter Nell Greenfieldboyce. Are fleas as interesting as whales? What's the likelihood of passing down kidney disease? And how likely are you to be swept away by a tornado? Those are some of the questions NPR science reporter Nell Greenfieldboyce grapples with in her new book, Transient and Strange: Notes on the Science of Life. It includes a number of essays considering the intersection of the wonders of the universe with the personal. Nell Greenfieldboyce has been heard here since joining NPR in 2005, and it's my pleasure to welcome her to WAMC. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on the show.
It's clear from the book that you and your children were precocious. What got you interested in science as a career?
Oh, I always loved science as a kid and, just mucking around outside and like encountering, toads and little insects and plants. I was always curious and I thought I was going to be a scientist. And when I went to college, I took, biology courses and chemistry, but I also took history of science courses. And I got fascinated with science as a sort of social activity and learning about how we came to know everything we know. And at some point, I realized like all the stuff that I enjoyed as a kid, like watching documentaries and reading popular science, that there was actually a job which involved making those things. And so I've been doing that ever since. And I feel like I really lucked out. It's an awesome career, and it gets me to study interesting things all the time.
Did seeing things through your kids' eyes reawaken something in how you approach science and what you were just talking about?
I think so, because kids, it's kind of a cliche, but kids are kind of scientists themselves. They're, fearless in probing, whatever new thing they encounter, and they have no preconceptions, and they're incredibly, serious and dedicated to just trying to figure everything out. And that includes some real big philosophical questions about, death and the universe and what it all means, the kind of questions that as an adult you can sort of, stop thinking about and maybe focus on the day-to-day. But when your kids are right there, sort of looking to you for guidance, suddenly you are reminded that, oh yeah, like all this stuff is out there to be grappled with.
I'm dying to know, how come your kids call you Nell?
It's a funny thing. I grew up calling my mother Susie, and people would ask me, like, is she your real mother? And obviously she is, but it's my brother, when he was growing up, one day just asked her, like, what's your name? And she told him. And so he started calling her that, and I started calling him that too, because he was my older brother. And when my kids were very young, they called me, Mama, and I kind of liked it. It was cool. But then at some point, they just started calling me Nell too. So I don't know. I'm not sure what it means, but what can I say? It's my name.
Let me ask you a personal question, because the last part of your book is about how hard you and your husband really had to work to have children. And at a lot of times, you're questioning the path, you're questioning your choices. How did you get convinced? How did you know that was something you really wanted?
Having children or going through a sort of genetic
Well, I guess
screening
both
process?
in a way.
Well, I don't know if I ever questioned that I wanted children. They seem like awesome fun, and indeed they have been. But for me, my husband's family has a kidney disease, a genetic kidney disease. And so we were faced with whether or not we wanted to try to do anything to try to avoid passing that down. And so it sort of thrust us into a whole world of medical decision making that, for me, as somebody who's very aware of the history of science and the history of genetics, and in particular, the really dark history of eugenics that existed in this country, it really made me think about the whole process, I think, in a pretty complicated way. And it certainly set me off on a series of events and decisions that Yeah, were difficult at the time, and I tried to write about it all pretty frankly because I feel like, yeah, it's personal, but at the same time people are having to deal with this stuff, and not everybody talks about it, and I thought, well, here I could talk about it and also put it in some historical context.
How's everybody doing now?
As far as I know, we're great.
That's good. My colleague here at the station has a saying that a version of me is on the radio. And so it occurs to me that your book is a lot more revealing than you normally are, in your stories. How did you decide to open the door a little bit?
I've always been kind of a private person, especially, as a journalist. You want to maintain a sort of reserve. You want, what you're reporting on to be the story, not you. But I've always done more personal writing, whether it's letters to friends or other things. And when I started writing these essays, I found myself writing about things that were rather personal. And, I kind of surprised myself in that I don't mind. I don't really care. I thought I would care more than I did, that other people would hear about this stuff. But to me, everything in the book is kind of an everyday, ordinary experience that people have. And the only difference is that I have spent my whole career and really much of my life thinking about science. And so, all the poetry and the metaphors and the ways I have of trying to understand it involve science, So when I write about, my first kiss, it was a weird situation, but it was also mixed up with black holes. And, sort of that's an example of how, like, for me, in a way, it's revealing because it's personal, but in another way, these are pretty universal experiences, I think.
So a lot of science reporting in recent years is pretty grim. It's new diseases, climate change, that kind of thing. How do you go about retaining your sense of awe and openness given the fact that so much of it is negative?
There is a lot of grimness in the world, and you don't want to hide from that. And in fact, that's one of the things I explore in this book is, like, when you're a parent, you have to tell your children about so much that's so difficult, like nuclear war, like nuclear weapons. It's like, yeah, as an adult you can sort of pretend they don't exist, but when your kids start asking you questions, you have to give them answers. But at the same time, there is so much beauty in the world, and there are so many people working hard to make discoveries and do things. And, as I report on them, people are excited and people are thrilled to know that somebody's out there trying to figure out exactly what color Neptune is, for example, or exactly how something evolved or how it came to be or what's going on with Venus. And, what about those black holes? I think that it makes people feel hopeful. Hopeful that we're figuring things out and that we're all doing it together as humanity.
I'm glad you brought up space because it's such an interesting time. A lot of your coverage has been on space exploration and NASA, and I just wonder what you make of this moment we're in where so much of the effort to get back out there is being done by private enterprise and billionaires as much as the government.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, NASA is trying to do something different, and it's trying to make a more sustainable situation where it's not just one government agency doing things, but integrate it more into an industrial base and economic activity. And we'll see how that goes. I mean, obviously there are differences between NASA and the private sector, and people have different feelings about this, and I think that it's kind of an experiment. It's kind of a new way of trying to do things, and as it's happening, we're seeing all the pros and cons playing out.
I know it's probably cost prohibitive for now, but would you go up?
Would I go to space?
If you had the chance? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely not. Never.
Me neither. Okay, honesty question. Are you doodling as we do this interview?
I have a pen in my hand right now. I'm not actually doodling because I'm in the studio and I wouldn't want the scratching to get picked up by the microphone. But there are papers in front of me with geometric doodles, yes, that I have done in between interviews. Mm-hmm.
So writing about it didn't end the fixation?
No. So I have a whole essay in the book about my my compulsive geometric doodling, and that is so much a part of me. I don't think it could ever go away. It's almost essential to the working of my brain, which is, what I was trying to write about in the essay, is trying to understand, like, what's going on there, and, like, how does it connect with the history of science, and why do so many people doodle in the same ways, and why do we doodle? I mean, there's a appalling lack of scientific research on this. So if some potential PhD candidate is listening, there's a whole world that could be studied there.
As you noted, your doodling puts you in good company, so I guess don't stop.
Well, as the title of the essay is, everybody does it.
Nell Greenfieldboyce is the author of the new book, Transient and Strange, Notes on the Science of Life, and you can hear her reports on this station. She's a science correspondent for NPR. Nell, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.